Okay, good morning, good evening. Delighted to be here with the Asia Global Dialogue session on what's next for global action on climate change. So I'm Pamela Marr. I'll be the moderator, facilitator for this session, and I'm really delighted to have three perspectives on the issue, three perspectives from people who should be in positions to know and with a vast experience across China and the United States, and of course, the global environment movement. So, you know, everybody who's attending probably knows that China several weeks ago made a big splash in the during one of the UN General Assembly events and pledged to be net zero by 2060. And this is a commitment that has always been on the cards, but this is the first public commitment that China has made in this regard. And very quickly after that, both Japan and Korea also made their very public pledges to go net zero by 2050. And then recently, Joe Biden, President-elect Biden, has actually chosen as his designated climate envoy, John Kerry, who's the former Secretary of State, who was really key in building the US's pledge to the Paris Accord. So, and then, you know, for those of us in Hong Kong, this is where I'm based, Carrie Lam in her recent policy address also made a pledge which would mean that Hong Kong would be net zero CO2 emissions by 2050. And for those of us who are advocates and supporters of environmental progress in Hong Kong, I think this was a very heartening measure, something that pleases us all. So everything looks kind of, there's a lot of positive momentum on the global scene with regard to climate. And I just, I think this seminar, this seminar is going to explore how we actually deliver that, what it all means, what are the economics behind behind pushing the world to net zero by 2050, and what does it mean in terms of accelerating the pace of technological innovation and knowledge sharing, which will really be key, because, you know, countries make pledges, there are roadmaps, but we're still learning as a global community, and we really need a lot of science, finance, business, and so on. So let me first turn to Lin Xu. So Lin is someone who has a deep experience in the Chinese government with the National Development and Reform Commission and drafting China's 5-year plans in the past. You've also worked with the China Securities Regulatory Commission on financial planning. So there is no better person to know what will be the impact of this on the Chinese government? What does it mean for the government's approach to the environment? Is it actually a surprise? Because, you know, China has always had a very strong commitment to the environment, and is this simply one more step? And what's next? What should we be looking for? So please give us some perspective on this.
Okay, thank you. China is the largest population country in the world. Of course, we are largest construction countries and largest consumption countries. Of course, we has been the largest pollutant producers and the carbon dioxide emission countries. So we are facing big challenges in this area, not only from the international community, but also within the country, because people, when their income has been increased, people expect more, actually the better quality life, which is closely related to the environmental issues and the ecological issues. So the Chinese government has been paying a lot of attention on how to improving the environmental issues and the ecological issues. We set this as a kind of issue for the civilization or ecological civilization. I think probably it's the only country in the world put this issue as a kind of a civilization. So we have been taking measures try to reduce the pollutions and improving the carbon dioxide emission issues. President Xi Jinping has just announced our new target, try to reach the carbon peak by 2030 and carbon neutral by 2060. This is a new target that the government has already committed to the international society. Probably it is a kind of a surprise to the international people, but for us, it is not so surprised because within the government, we have been discussing this issue for quite a period of time. And we judged the possible progress in technology and the new energy in China. I think, you know, if we take more measures, it's feasible for Chinese government or for the whole Chinese economy to reach that target. But of course, we have to do a lot of things. Otherwise, you know, I don't think the target will be automatically realized without measures, more measures, and the more encouragement or incentives. I raised some of the areas which we have to consider. The first one is we have to further improving the energy reserving measures to raise the energy efficiency in different fields in China. Because according to our estimation, without efficient energy reserving applications, China's total energy consumption will be doubled based on the current level, which means the per capita energy consumption in China will be a little bit more than that of Japan and Germany. But of course, still much big gap between the China and the US with that number. But we cannot, you know, expect that China's per capita energy consumption close to that of United States or even the Russia. I think it's going to be a big challenge not only to China but also to the global society. So we have to do more energy reserving measures, which means that our energy efficiency level should be close to Japan and Germany. Currently, our energy consumption, energy efficiency is still maybe 30 to 40% lower than that of Japan and Germany. That means we still have a lot of things to do. And in China, the energy reserving technology innovation and importation and application should be further encouraged by the government. And in the field of building and construction areas, in manufacturing areas, in transportation areas, even in the digital economy areas. Finally, should be, you know, in the people's daily life areas. In all these areas, the government can take more stimulation measures to improving the energy efficiency in China. That's one area. Another area is green or low carbon energy replacement, substitution. In China, we can expect that our solar electricity generation, wind generation, and the biomass technologies can be improved in the next 5 years, which can further reduce the cost of energy production in China. And the fuel cell technology and energy storage technology has been improving a lot in the past few years. I think in the next 5 years, this area, in this area, the enterprises and the companies can get the commercial competitiveness on that. Based on that progress, we can further use the green energy to substitute the traditional fossil energy. In this area, our expectation is very high. And the third area is the low carbon urban construction. China is still in the right process of urbanization, but in the urban designing and the urban planning area, we have to put the carbon neutral ideology or carbon neutral technology in the urban designing, planning, and the constructions. Otherwise, it's difficult for the whole society to reach the carbon neutral target. According to our estimation, by 2035, I think the more than 80% of China's population will be living in the urban areas. Currently, we have only 60% of the population living in the urban areas. So that's the urban construction. I mean, the local urban construction is very important for China. Another area is the further improving the whole society forestation, because this is a kind of a way for the carbon nutrition. The most difficult thing is how to make the forestation investment to be capitalized in the future. Then we can attract more investment to do the forestation for the whole society, which is, I think we need more green finance support and the green investment. Then we have to take the quota for the whole country. It is not easy, but for some of the sectors, like the electricity generation, like the steel manufacturing, like the construction materials sectors, very heavily related to the carbon dioxide emissions. We should have the quota system and the quota distribution for the whole sectors. Then based on that, we can improving China's carbon trading system. Otherwise, without such mechanisms, it's quite difficult for all these manufacturing sectors to improving or accelerating their carbon dioxide emission reduction. And another thing probably is very important for the global carbon dioxide emission controls, which is for all the technologies and the products and the services in the green and the low carbon areas, we should have a fully free trade system. Mm-hmm. Yeah, which means no restrictions, no tariffs for the trading and the investment. It's quite important, like, just the WTO negotiations in the ITA products, in more than 20 years ago. It is good for the information technology transactions and free trade and investment. I think for the green and the low carbon areas, we need such free trading and investment mechanism and institutions.
Okay, thank you, Lin. That's a really key point, and it's clear that there will be a lot of innovation and technology development that will be led by China, including the scaling of existing technologies. And it's a perfect segue to ask Christine to reflect on how, if we actually achieve the freer trade of environmental goods and services within Asia, what does this mean for the the climate sort of challenge and meeting the climate challenge in the Asia Pacific, sort of beyond China's borders.
No, what I find very interesting, if I may just pick up one point from Mr. Lin, is I think what he's done for us is he's framed what China has to do. And it ranges from, you know, so many, well, all sectors, right? It's sort of all hands on deck, including the money, right? No money, no talk, as we say in Cantonese. So China has plans to make all these things happen, you know, having all balls up in the air for the next 4 decades. Now, around China, we have, of course, other nations. As you said, Pamela, at the beginning of your remarks, we have Japan, we have South Korea, and we have cities, you know, like Hong Kong. So I think what you're going to see going forward is many Chinese cities and provinces will also set their targets. You know, I think if you talk to Chinese officials in cities, big and small, they right now have a large plate of environmental targets and timeline they have to meet, right? So you could say that China is going to hurtle along in doing many things at the same time. Now, with Japan and South Korea, these are also very powerful industrial nations. And in the previous session of AGI's conference today, we had a reminder from one of the speakers from Japan, where he says 25% of Japan's trade is with China today. Now, Mr. Lin also reminded us that China today, in terms of energy efficiency, is still relatively low when you compare them to the best in the world, which are Japan and Germany. So you can immediately imagine that trade between, well, regionally, trade between South Korea, Japan, and China, if they use decarbonization, if they use environment as a framework for deepening import and export of goods, but also exchanges and so on, this is really very positive, and this is really, I think, a very good thing going forward. And Pamela, you also reminded us that we're not alone in the world. There's Europe. The EU is a leader in many aspects of climate change and the environment. So despite the fact that we have many kind of ideological conflicts today, I think you do see Europe wanting to work with China on certain aspects, and climate change is certainly one of them. So with the EU, thinking through regulations, laws, and, you know, Pamela, you know all about this, the EU taxonomy for defining what's green. These are, I think, very rich areas for China, Japan, South Korea, and the rest of Asia really to exchange with the EU. The last thing I want to say is bringing in the kind of rest of Asia. I think we saw that by China stepping out and putting a timeline and a date to carbon neutrality, this really represents a total revolution in its economy, you know, in its social behavior, industry, technology. So the next 40 years, decarbonization, ecological civilization, and also biodiversity, by the way, these are some of the major pillars that China is going to transform itself. This is a very powerful message, I think, for the rest of the emerging economies, that they too could consider using decarbonization, climate change, biodiversity to be their next growth pattern. And if people absorb this message, then I think there's a high level of cooperation in the region, and also with other countries in Europe and North America. Let me stop here for now.
Thank you, Christine. In terms of, we've spoken broadly about the need for more cooperation, more financing, and so on. What do you see as the right frameworks for this? Because, we have so many pockets of knowledge around the world, and it seems like everyone is struggling to find out, how do we move this around? How do we circulate it? And so I'm just wondering, Lynn, you are the head of the US-China Green Fund. How can your fund be kind of a model for how the world tackles this problem together? And I think for Christine, when we talk about sharing of knowledge and technological innovation on climate within Asia, it's still at a very, for me, it's a very elementary stage. We have yet to get to the point where, the automatic thinking is to, how do we get this technology out and scale it into the areas that need it most? Where many silos going on. How do we connect these up? Maybe hear from Lynn first, and then over to you, Christine.
Okay. US-China Green Fund actually was initiated by Hank Paulson and Vice Premier Liu He in a few years ago, and then we set this market-based private equity investment. What we like to do is we want to be a kind of a pilot equity investment fund for Chinese investment institutions to specifically engage in the green investment. The energy efficiency and the new energy area is the most important priority for our investment. Our another mission is trying to use this platform or channel to improving the cooperation between China and the US in green technology applications and the green product exploitation and transport cooperation. But unfortunately, since the China-US situations in the last few years, it's not very good for us to do the cross-border cooperation. So we didn't do much. So we, in the past 2 or 3 years, we did our most investment within China. But I think as the new government in US maybe may well change the attitude toward China in this field. I think we are expecting more opportunities will be, emerged between China and the US in the green and especially the low carbon climate change cooperation. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think there's many of us around this, both here and in the audience, who are looking forward to more US-China collaboration. Christine, do you want to add anything? And before we turn to Peter.
Yes, no, I do. I think each jurisdiction, and I'm not looking at just the national jurisdiction. I mean, obviously, if you're looking at, China, it's a very big country, very diverse conditions, needs a lot of money for the transition. But, if we break it down, and you asked the question, how do we raise money for specific things? Now, I think China is very wise in the 14th five-year plan to focus on energy efficiency, because the more you can focus on this, the fewer generating plants you are going to need. Now, for cities, so, if you look at Shenzhen, Hong Kong, Shanghai, Guangzhou, all cities, cities in Asia as well, the city authorities all have certain capabilities of raising their own money. So we need to look at what governments can do, and we need to look at what the private sector is willing to fund. And, some of the things might seem unsexy, but to think about two things. Cities all have buildings. Energy efficiency in buildings, it's, the technology is pretty mature. The management can be much improved so that people understand that there's a great gain there. But we do need government policy to drive this, perhaps to provide guarantees and so on, so that you could have some revolving funds. And then, of course, you have Japan. And I think Tokyo has a lot to teach Asia about understanding the use of energy at a very deep level for buildings and then to trade energy for also building. So what I'm saying is there are things that we can combine that really generates the energy saving that all cities are looking for. And I would say this doesn't actually even cost a lot of money, but because it's relatively unsexy compared to, I mean, you know, sort of moonshot types of technology, people haven't focused in this area. But I do hope banks and even governments putting some money in is going to be able to really crack this nut.
Okay, thank you, Christine. Peter, would you like to tell us how has China's pledge been received in the US, and what do you think it can do for some of the US-China collaboration that Lynn has mentioned has been sort of on the back burner for the past several months, years?
Thank you so much. I think that the relationship between the United States and China is clearly complex, and over the last 4 years has become even more complicated. To start with, there seems to be light at the end of the tunnel in terms of the ability to have a civil conversation with shared commitments and shared global objectives. And it's always good to have a shared common ground to create friendship and alliances so that you can deal with the stickier issues eventually. So there's no question that in the Biden administration, addressing climate issues is front and center. It will be front and center in every single aspect of the government. Of course, that is a radical shift from what we've just gone through. Now, we also know that over the past 4 years, despite the position of the government and the president of the United States, there has been an intensive groundswell of engagement from the private sector in searching for new technologies, whether it relates to the reforestation or deforestation that Mr. Lin talked about, whether it has dealt with improvements in batteries, whether it's dealt with solar. There's so much. This is an era of innovation. It's a remarkable moment across the board in every sector. I mean, everyone except for perhaps the president of the United States knew that we had to be moving on addressing CO2 emissions. So the United States has not stood still. That's number one. Number two, there is a strong interest in especially with Secretary Kerry becoming the climate czar in the United States, with a collaboration. And this has happened in the past. I'm certain that there will now be constructive conversations going forward. And so I'm really encouraged just by that. The reality of the response of the United States to President Xi's commitment to being net neutral by 2060 is that it didn't get that much press. You know, the government didn't talk about it at all. Some of the scientific journals and the environmental organizations took note of it, of course, because it's an important issue and it's an important aspiration. I think that the other aspect, when you ask about the response, even in the environmental sector, there is, I don't want to say there is skepticism, but I would say that there is a lack of clarity as to how do you go from having to double your electric power generation by 15 terawatts hours by 2060 in clean energy. How do you get to that place when right now in 2020, China has, I think there's 23 gigatons of new coal-fired plants have been approved and under construction or planned for construction right now. So the delta really is, how does a country as complex and as large as China make this transition in a way that doesn't create such a burden on all of its citizens that there is a harsh negative reaction. And so I think that that's really what we all are really interested in learning. And I'm certain, and I know for a fact that the industry, the researchers, the government of China are very carefully trying to assess, what's the portfolio look like? How do you pull back on fossil fuels? How do you accelerate? Is it wind? Is it solar? Is it nuclear? What's the response to the nuclear based upon what happened in Japan just a few years ago? I mean, it is really complicated. What happens when 3.5 million employees, Chinese people that are working in the coal and the oil industry, have to change their jobs? So that I think there's a big question mark. It's not a skepticism that there's an intent. It's more, how do you achieve this? Because this is not going to be easy. It is going to have to take an all hands on deck commitment, starting at the very top with enormous engagement from the state-owned enterprises, establishing the rules and the regs for private sector to participate. I think the concept of a carbon market that's not just Chinese, but global is absolutely essential.
Yeah,
I think the concept of free trade, I mean, I can go on, but so I think that's the way I see this. It's not, it's an excitement that there's an opportunity. How do we do this together? Because it really is essential for every single person inhabiting this earth.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Those are all essential issues, and you've even raised one that is similar to a question that has been asked online, which is about the trade-offs that China will have to make in terms of speed of development, the quality of development, and any social factors that may have to come into play, like you mentioned. How do you transition millions of workers out of the fossil fuel industry? So maybe first turn to Lynn to address some of these, and then Christine, based on your policy engagement, please also chip in.
Yeah, I think that how to achieve that is the most important things for not only for China but for other countries. In China, our advantage is if the government has already made the decision, usually we have to take everything, try to reach the target. And we don't have to go through so much, complicated process for the argument or kind of things. Of course, we have argument. I have been working for China's 5-year plan for so many years. Within the process of the 5-year plan, we do have a lot of arguments between, different enterprises, different sectors, different ministries, and even among different provinces. But after the discussion or argument, we are easier for the other countries to finally, summarize and make the common understanding, and then to take the actions. In China, with regarding the carbon issues, we have already taken a lot of things, but I think we still have a lot of things to do. And the technology innovation, I think, in the new energy area and the energy efficiency area is the most important things. I think in the future, the government will allocate more resources to stimulate that innovation process. Another issue is the carbon trading issue, because this is a kind of a mechanism it is necessary for the whole country try to stimulate all the entities to reduce the carbon dioxide. And another issue is, I could say that is a kind of education and self-sacrifice for all the citizens to reduce their energy consumption, or to use more high energy efficiency products within their daily life. That's something we can do. Of course, the international collaboration between China, US, and other countries is also very important, because we have to import more upgraded technologies and products and services in this area. That's why I mentioned the free trade and investment institution is very important for the whole global society to reach the target. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. You've raised one of the issues that frequently comes up in development circles, which is that once China once the government decides something, everyone is focused on implementation, despite any argument or disagreement which has taken place previously. So it's that everyone is committed to a singular target. And this has been credited with a lot of China's achievements in the development space, including poverty alleviation, and for sure it will be essential in climate action. Christine, I actually want to ask you, what can the rest of Asia learn from this?
Well, I think there are a number of other features of the Chinese system that are important. First of all, is China's leaders' grasp of the data of what's happening in all these industries and different places is actually pretty good today. I mean, I know there's a long history of people not trusting data from China, but I think China has already taken a very big step. So I think the first lesson for other authorities that really want to have a big plan, right? Because you need to have all these balls up in the air. You need to be adjusting it all the time. And as Peter said, it isn't just about technology, it's also about people. So, if US is going to, essentially get out of coal, then what are they going to do with those states that are coal-producing states? Now, China has to think exactly the same thing. So, there is a huge socioeconomic side to it. And I think that the leadership in China are thinking that way. So first thing is you need to have a good grasp on data throughout your country, so how you're making your policy. Secondly is, let's face it, making policies over the course of several decades, you have to make adjustments all the time. So again, this is linked to how good is your information, how good is your system to drive down discussion, with all these moving parts in your country. Now, I think one thing that is important for people to think about is it is kind of or singing or dancing, or going in the same direction, whatever country you're in. But all countries have different political systems. The Chinese one tends to argue within, and then once they agree, they go forth. In the US, for example, people argue a lot, and then hopefully they're able to agree something. There's a very powerful private sector that sometimes surges ahead. In China, you have the government. So all I'm saying is these are different systems. But if other countries in Asia are going to think about how they're going to sustain in the long term, keeping to certain targets, I mean, we know where they have to go. They have to go approximately in the route of what China is doing. Then how do they get their political systems, because the political systems are also different, to all be moving ahead? So the second lesson people need to do is sustain education campaigns. So, if you don't do that, then you're going to lose momentum somehow. So the other thing that is related to this is, if we can carry the whole world along, so we can't have Paris fail. You need the whole world to understand that we're going in that direction. So these are, so we need campaigns, we need public education on the local level and on an international level consistently. And hopefully whatever government gets into whatever jurisdiction, that at least they can say, we have to continue with a very high level of public education and data collection.
Okay, thank you, Christine.
May I
Peter,
add
over
something?
to you on US-China and
Thank you so
governance.
much. Thank you. Thank you. First of all, I want to really state that clearly this is not just a China issue. This is a United States, America issue. This is a Europe issue. This is a global issue. And the US has a lot of work to do, for certain. There's no question about it. So I want to be clear that, and I think as Mr. Lin pointed out, the per capita energy consumption in the United States is over the top. So there's an enormous need to focus on efficiency and on reduction of energy use, on looking at new sources of energy. And I find that there's a great appetite for that. And even in the states that are principally driven by the coal energy and enterprise, they, because of the price of coal, they are now shifting into alternative and renewables. So the trends in the United States are also going in the right direction. But there are two things I'd like to touch upon that I think we don't want to overlook. The first is, how does the natural world fit into these solutions? And we touched upon reforestation as an important investment. Nature, just through the process of photosynthesis, can address 1/3 of the mitigation challenge, of the CO2 emission challenge targets. So that relates to, how do you preserve your forest? How do you increase your forest? How do you deal with your oceans, your salt marshes, your salt grasses? These are all ecological systems that are just a natural machine absorbing CO2, and they can truly help in terms of the climate challenge. They also create really important employment opportunities, because of all the people on coasts or the people living near forests, or just if you look at the Yellow River and the extraordinary success in China of the reforestation of the Yellow River, there is so much opportunity for both achieving great environmental benefit and employment benefit. And so I really think that has to be harnessed. The other part of environment is looking at soil, and it's looking at food production. I mean, if you think about, so it's normally there's a third of the solution can be nature-based, but on top of that, probably another 10 or 15% can be agricultural based. It's, how do we, grow our pork? How do we grow our beef? How do we grow our plants? What kind of soil are we going to be tilling? How do we absorb carbon by the way we farm? And there's this emerging science of regenerative agriculture, which is showing that you can easily increase and capture through living soil enormous amounts of carbon. So if you look at the role that an individual can play, an individual has a choice of what they eat. And if an individual can make a choice, is that we want to eat a product that actually absorbs carbon, that really helps drive enterprise in the right direction. So I do think there's an opportunity for collaboration between the state government and enterprise to actually redesign how we produce our food. And just the final point on the food sector is that methane emissions are 80% more toxic than CO2 emissions. And most of the methane emissions, or much of the methane emissions, comes from cattle. And all you have to do with cattle to reduce their emissions by 90% is give them a supplement of seaweed. And that could in itself be a phenomenal industry. And actually the CO2 the CH4 that's emitted by cattle, by 1.5 billion cows on Earth, is 13 gigatons, which is more than all the gigatons that are emitted in China annually. So if we look at food, that's a big deal. And the final comment really relates to campaigns. And I think, Christine, you are totally right on. For me and for elders, it's an intellectual challenge of how do you solve this problem. For young people, it's their life. And we need to recognize that they are demanding that there be a change. And so it goes beyond policy and money into heart and determination. And I think that there's a great hope for me, as probably the elder amongst us. I'm so enthused by the fact that that when I started working on environmental issues, no one was interested. Today, everybody is interested. And so I think there's a lot of hope, and I don't think we should in any way be pessimistic about the opportunity to turn this around.
Okay, thank you. Those are some really good points. What does that look like? Like the concerted public education campaign backed by commitments by organizations, beyond government, by businesses, by individuals and NGOs and so on. People have a short attention span, and policy always meets trade-offs. So how do we keep up this kind of fight? Beyond the sort of scientific technological collaboration, what do you want to see? Peter and then Christine, okay. Maybe? Go ahead.
Well, what I want to see is, I want us to learn how to communicate about these issues. Mm-hmm. And the way you communicate is not by what you say as much as by what people actually hear. And we need to understand, what are people hearing? How can someone be anti-environment? I mean, it just drives me nuts when I think about that fact that there are many people that are anti-environment. They're pro-economy, anti-environment. It's like choosing between your right arm and your left arm, or your heart and your lungs, right? We're in the process of redesigning and rethinking. And as Mr. Lin has said, and Christine has said, the businesses and the technologies are all moving in the right direction. The government policies are accelerating this. We need intelligent government policies. And then we need a campaign of educating our people, our young people, as to why this is absolutely essential, that there's actually no other place to move to. And so my sense is that takes genius of communications, and it's not data. I mean, I don't mean that. Data drives policy and has to be linked to enterprise and revenue generation. But if you want to capture the hearts of people, you have to think about what's the messaging and how do we make that really, uplifting and positive.
Right. Yeah, and that's a great reminder, given that the way we used to communicate before the pandemic has really changed, and that we need to do a lot more to be using different kinds of media, different kinds of emotional connectors in order to drive the climate message home, all the while keeping the data in front of those who really make decisions by it. Christine, do you want to add something?
I do. I think Peter and I can go to the same school on this, because we need to find something, and there is something where it resonates with each one of us, in particular, younger people, but older people as well. As we become more wealthy, particularly, in Chinese and Asian society, one of the things that we know is we waste a lot of food. And if we combine what Peter said, which is all the food types that we have, eating meat, maybe we should eat lower down the food chain, we should eat more locally, we should not waste food. Food waste itself is a huge problem. I see that with food, we can use this across cultures and across countries for collaboration. I was on another panel discussion about a week or so ago, and I was doing some research between California and Hong Kong. And actually, in California, I didn't realize that that there is already sort of a policy which nobody seems to know about or talk about anymore, where between now and 2030, they're going to cut food waste by 50%. But I didn't hear about it until I start looking at it. So what I'm saying is, this could be a worldwide campaign. But even for a little city like Hong Kong or Los Angeles, this is something that people can grab around them, and it communicates on so many levels. Now, how you communicate, I think we have plenty of people in the world who can shape the communication that resonates with people. So as I said, you can be healthier, you can waste less, you don't have to eat this, there are many choices. So, food, I think, communicates on so many levels that I think it's a great one to start off with.
Okay, thank you. Peter, we're coming to the end of we have 8 minutes left, and I just want to kind of pick your mind a bit more on what should we be looking for from the Biden administration on climate, besides, the US going to, rejoin the Paris Accord. Is he going to be putting more money into like scientific research or technologies for climate? Is it going to be incentives for business? I mean, there's a wealth of mechanisms at the disposal of the US government. What is going to change?
Well, I would start by saying that there will be an encouragement across the board for companies to become involved in this, and for state governments and city governments to become involved. And just by the fact that Biden has won, the automobile manufacturing companies are saying that they want to abide. They no longer want to be involved in a lawsuit against the state of California, involving gasoline mileage. So there will be a transformation, and it's taking place already. But there will be federal investments as well. There will be investments in R&D, in science. There'll be investments in batteries. There'll be, I'm certain, a more collaborative effort with the USChina Green Fund, that there will actually be an opportunity for an interchange of ideas and investments in both countries and in other countries in terms of new technologies. So I think it will touch every sector of the government. And I think that that's really, it's so difficult to really pick out one or two. There'll be more, and I think there also he's brought on a really interesting person to lead the U.S. Economic Council, a fellow named Brian Deese, who used to be at BlackRock, and Brian is really interested in looking at what are the fiscal incentives for the private sector to take climate and environmental issues into account when they are making their investments and doing their due diligence. And so I think it's going to permeate every aspect of this country.
Okay, yeah, that's actually very good news for the corporate sector, because right now there's one set of guidelines and one set of pace of progress in Europe, another set in Asia, and then a third set in the US. So if you're selling globally, it's somewhat, you basically have to be triple or quadruple speed with your environmental programs, if, in terms of investments. So greater collaboration and greater kind of singular vision would certainly be really helpful. And, I realize we're coming to the end we've got 5 minutes left. So actually I want to ask each of you, we've touched on education, we've touched on science, we've touched on policy and international collaboration. So if you had, like $100 million, or maybe that's not enough, if you had $500 million to invest for the global kind of fight on climate change, what would you do? How would you spend it?
Who do you want me to touch upon that first, or Christine?
Yeah, sure. And if you want to give it away, that's fine too, but.
It's so interesting because I've just been in a conversation with people about something about that scale right now, thinking about what you would do with money at that level. Well, for me, and it really connects to the work that I'm doing right now, I've learned in the last couple of years that 1/3 of the earth is under the guardianship or the ownership of indigenous peoples, of indigenous communities. And it happens that on their 1/3 of the earth, there is 1/3 of the above ground carbon, there's 80% of the biodiversity, and 40% of the intact ecosystems. And these communities, which are across the Amazon, the Pacific, the boreal forests in northern Canada, parts of Africa, New Guinea, et cetera, they are under siege. And so if I had that kind of money, what I would do is really work collaboratively with those communities to give them the resources so they can actually secure their territory, because the fact is that their territories are the healthiest territories on earth, and they still live there. And I would trust them to take care of those territories so that we would all be the beneficiaries of their being able to keep freshwater fisheries, forests, healthy soils, biological diversity, and their own cultures alive. So if you want to send me that check, I know exactly where I'm going to spend it.
Okay, thank you. And that's also related to the NGO that you have founded a couple years ago, Tero, which I encourage everyone to get on the internet and NIATERO. You're doing some
NIATERO, Tero.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, thank you. Christine, over to you.
I'd love to have $500 million.
Yes.
I presume that's US dollars. So I will, I'll segment it into two parts. I won't say exactly how much in which yet. I will spend this money working with others in Hong Kong to really promote energy efficiency in buildings, including investing some money into how we can clad the external walls of our very tall buildings so that the building itself could have PV panels, so that the building itself could be a power generator. So I'll use a part of that money for that. The second thing I would do, in the spirit of promoting US-China relations, is to pitch Guangdong, Hong Kong, and Macau with California and ask them in 10 years to reduce food waste by 50%.
Thank you very much. That's good to hear, given that Hong Kong is a huge, it's one of the cities that wastes the most food, of any city, of any city. So Lynn, we are coming down to the end of the webinar, and the final question, if you can hear this, is if you had $500 million US dollars to spend on the global fight against climate change, how would you spend it? And this is perhaps a question that you actually have, given that you're running the US-China Green Fund. So tell us how you would spend it.
Sorry, my computer was disconnected with the net. Okay. Well, if I have $5 million US dollars, I would like to allocate my money to do the new energy technology innovation investment, because in this area, we can contribute more to the carbon dioxide reduction target.
So you mean like renewable energy?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, that's a great scope for collaboration between US and China, as well as China and the rest of the world. So thank you, Xulin, Christine, and Peter for joining us for this. We hope everyone online will continue to engage with the Asia Global Institute. And okay, so that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hey, thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye.